The officer's hand hit the back of her neck before she even saw him coming. 1 second, Olivia Bennett was unlocking her car door after a 12-hour shift, and the next she was chest down against the hood, her cheek pressed into cold metal, her wrists wrenched behind her back. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. A police cruiser's strobes cut the dark in red and blue pulses, painting everything in that nauseating rhythm. People stopped on the sidewalk. Phones came out. Someone shouted something she couldn't make out over the ringing in her ears. "Don't move. Stop resisting." "I'm not." Her voice came out wrong, too small. "I'm not resisting anything." "I said don't move." What no one filming that night could have known, what the officer now grinding her face into the hood of her own car couldn't have imagined, was that this woman had once kept a man breathing in a ditch outside Kandahar while a firefight cracked the air 20 yards away. She had stayed calm then. She stayed calm now. That was maybe the most dangerous thing about her. If you've made it this far, I want you to stay until the very end, because this story is going to go places that will shake you. Hit like, follow along, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Blackridge wasn't a small town, but it wasn't big enough that people didn't talk. The city sat in that particular American middle ground. Large enough to have a downtown skyline, small enough that an incident in the hospital parking lot on the corner of Millward and 5th could be on 3 different neighborhood Facebook groups before midnight. The Hargrove Medical Center occupied the north end of the block, a mid-sized regional hospital that handled everything from routine births to trauma cases that the smaller clinics in the surrounding county couldn't touch. It was understaffed the way most hospitals were understaffed, running on the shoulders of people who showed up anyway. Olivia Bennett had been showing up for 3 years. She was 29, and she looked it. Not in a bad way, just in the way of someone who'd stopped pretending to be younger than she was and didn't particularly care. She kept her dark hair pulled back at work, wore her scrubs like armor, and had the specific stillness of someone who'd learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her coworkers liked her. Her patients trusted her. Her supervisor, a brisk woman named Ruth Calloway, had told her twice in the last year that she should go back to school for her NP. Olivia had smiled both times and said she was thinking about it. She wasn't really thinking about it. She was thinking about getting to her car without her feet giving out. The shift had been brutal in the specific grinding way that Tuesday nights sometimes were. Not dramatic, not filled with the kind of crises that at least gave you something to hold on to afterward. Just a steady current of need. An elderly man who'd fallen. 2 kids with fevers their parents had waited too long to address. A woman with chest pain that turned out to be anxiety and who cried the whole time and apologized for crying. Olivia had held her hand for 11 minutes she didn't technically have. Then she went back to work. By the time she walked out of Hargrove at 11:48 p.m., her left knee was aching. An old injury, the kind that reminded her of things she'd mostly stopped thinking about. And she was already running through what she had in her apartment that she could eat without cooking. The parking lot was half empty and too bright, the way hospital lots always were, and her car was near the back where she'd left it that morning. She didn't see the cruiser until its lights came on. The spotlight hit her first and she stopped instinctively, shielding her eyes. Standard response. Don't make sudden movements. Wait. She was still in her scrubs with her badge clipped to her chest pocket, hospital lanyard swinging, her bag over one shoulder. She looked exactly like what she was. The officer got out fast. He was mid-30s maybe, with the kind of build that came from genuinely working at it and knowing it. His nameplate said Vaughn. He had his hand near his belt, and his eyes were doing that moving without really seeing thing that told her he'd already made up his mind about something. "Ma'am, stop right there. Keep your hands where I can see them." She stopped. Hands out. Open. "Okay, what's this about?" "We're looking for a suspect, female, late 20s, dark hair, approximately your height and build. There was a robbery on Carver Street about 40 minutes ago. I've been inside that building for 12 hours. She tilted her head toward Hargrove. "I'm a nurse. I just finished my shift." Vaughn looked at her badge the way you look at a flyer someone hands you that you're planning to throw away. "I'm going to need you to step over here. I can give you my employee ID, my badge number. You can call the—" "Step over here, ma'am. Now." Something tightened in her chest. Not fear exactly. She'd been in worse situations than a parking lot in Black Ridge. But fear was a spectrum, and this sat somewhere on it, and she was tired and her knee hurt, and the man had his hand near his belt and wasn't really listening to her. She stepped where he pointed. License and registration. My registration is in the car. My license is in my bag. Get it slowly. She got it slowly. She was aware of the spotlight, still on her, aware of someone across the street who'd stopped walking. She handed Vaughn her license, and he looked at it for a long time. Olivia Bennett. Yes. You live on Tanner Road? I do? What were you doing on Carver Street tonight? I wasn't on Carver Street. I've been here, at this hospital. You can verify that with them. I'm asking the questions. He handed her license back without looking at her. Turn around. Everything in her went still. Excuse me? Turn around, hands behind your back. I haven't done anything. I have a hospital badge. I have a timestamp on my badge swipe from when I clocked in this morning. I have a supervisor you can call right now. Ma'am, if you don't comply, I will add resisting to whatever else we're looking at tonight. She turned around. Her cheek hit the hood harder than it needed to. She heard someone across the lot say something. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, alarmed. The cuffs went on too tight. She said so. He didn't adjust them. He was already on his radio calling something in, and she was lying on the hood of her own car in her scrubs with her hospital badge visible from 3 feet away, staring at the concrete under the bumper, breathing slowly. She'd learned that in the Army. The breathing. Officer Derek Vaughn had been with the Blackridge PD for 9 years, and in those 9 years he'd developed a particular confidence in his own read of situations. He'd describe it as instinct. His lieutenant had once called it tunnel vision, but that was after a complaint, and complaints were filed by people who didn't understand how the job actually worked. The call had come in at 10:52 p.m. Armed robbery at a convenience store on Carver. One victim assaulted, suspect described as a young woman, dark hair, athletic build, fled on foot. Vaughn had been 2 blocks away. He'd run the area, come up with nothing. Then he'd looped the hospital block because it was close, and he'd seen a woman matching the description walking alone in a parking lot at nearly midnight, and he'd made his call. The fact that she had a badge around her neck registered. He'd decided it registered less than he would have expected. He wasn't thinking about that very hard. What's your unit number? He said into the radio. 47. You got something? Maybe. Detaining a female on Millward, gonna bring her in for a look. Dark hair, 20s, was in the area. There was a pause on the other end. She got an ID? Working on it. He wasn't working on it. She'd given him her license and he'd handed it back, and now she was cuffed against her car, and the license was in his pocket and he'd look at it again later. I'll call it in when I know more. Vaughn. A different voice. His sergeant, Morales. What's the address? Hargrove Medical Lot on Millward. She affiliated with the hospital? Vaughn looked at the badge, at the lanyard, at the word Hargrove printed clearly enough that he could read it from where he was standing. Possibly. Possibly? Morales sounded like he was choosing words. Vaughn, be careful. I'm always careful. He put her in the back of the cruiser. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She sat with her cuffed hands pressing into the seat back and looked straight ahead, and that bothered him more than if she'd yelled at him, though he couldn't have said why. Hargrove Medical Center's night supervisor found out Olivia was missing at 12:20 a.m. Not missing, technically. Absent. Which was almost worse, because Olivia was the kind of person who texted if she was going to be 5 minutes late. Ruth Calloway had worked the floor for 16 years and had a nose for when something was off. And something was off before she even checked the parking lot cameras. The cameras showed what had happened in 43 seconds of footage that would later become very important. Olivia walking out the door. Olivia stopping when the lights hit her. Olivia's hands going up, the officer approaching, the takedown, the cuffs. Ruth watched it twice, her jaw locked, and then she called the Blackridge non-emergency line. She was told someone would look into it. She asked which precinct Olivia might have been taken to. She was told she'd have to wait for a callback. She did not wait. She called Olivia's phone 3 times, straight to voicemail. She called the main precinct line and asked, carefully, whether a nurse from Hargrove Medical had been brought in that evening. Long pause on the other end. I can't confirm. I have camera footage of one of my nurses being handcuffed in our parking lot 40 minutes ago, Ruth said. Her voice was extremely even. She'd learned that trick too, though from different teachers than Olivia had. I need to know where she is. Another pause. I'll have someone call you back. No one called back. Well, the precinct on Dunmore Street was the kind of building that had been built in the 1970s and renovated twice since without ever quite getting rid of the smell of the 1970s. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, a holding area that was functionally separated from the booking desks by one low counter and a door with a wire mesh window. Olivia had been sitting in a hard plastic chair for 40 minutes by the time anyone talked to her again. Her hands were still cuffed. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man whose nameplate said Burwell, had taken her badge and her bag and told her to sit. He hadn't said anything about the badge. He hadn't said anything about calling anyone. A younger officer had asked if she wanted water, and she'd said yes, and no water had arrived. She used the time to breathe, to watch. The room wasn't busy. It was a Tuesday night in a mid-sized city, not Saturday, not summer. Two officers across the room talking about something on one of their phones. A man in a jacket she didn't recognize who might have been a detective. The wire mesh window on the door behind her, and through it, the hallway leading to what she guessed were the holding cells. Vaughn came through that door at 1:05 a.m. He looked, she thought, like he'd expected her to be more broken down by now. She was sitting straight-backed in the plastic chair, the way she'd sat through briefings in places that made this room look comfortable. And when he pulled a chair around and sat down across from her, she met his eyes steadily. You want to tell me what you were doing in that parking lot? I was going to my car, after my shift. What time did your shift end? Officially at 11:30. I clocked out at 11:48. She paused. My badge swipe records are in your system as of 2 hours ago. The card logs every entry and exit. You can pull it. Vaughn tilted his head slightly. We're working on that. You should work faster. Someone was hurt in a robbery, and the actual person who did it is still out there. She kept her voice neutral, factual. I'm not her. You match the description. I match a description. There's a difference. She looked at the cuffs on her wrists. These are still very tight. They're regulation. They're cutting off circulation to my left hand. I have nerve damage in that wrist. Old injury. She looked up at him. I'd like them adjusted, please. He looked at her wrists, at the small scar that ran along the ulnar side of her left forearm, which he probably thought was decorative or self-inflicted or something that confirmed whatever story he'd already told himself about her. He didn't adjust the cuffs. Old injury, he said. From what? She considered him. Does that matter right now? It might. I'd rather talk to someone who can either charge me with something or release me. She kept looking at him. Because those are the options. You know that. Vaughn stood up slowly. He wasn't going to adjust the cuffs. He was also, she noticed, not looking entirely comfortable. A small thing. She filed it away. Sit tight, he said. I don't appear to have another option. He went back through the door with the mesh window, and she heard his footsteps fade, and she sat with the pain in her left wrist and the buzz of the fluorescent lights, and thought about the fact that whoever had robbed a store on Carver Street was still out there, and someone had been hurt, and the officer who should have been finding them had spent his night in a hospital parking lot convincing himself he'd already done his job. At 1:30 a.m., a different officer came by. Young, couldn't have been more than 2 years on the job. He had the particular awkwardness of someone who'd noticed something wrong and hadn't decided yet whether to say anything about it. Ms. Bennett? Yes. He set a paper cup of water on the chair next to her. Sorry about earlier, forgot. Thank you. He stood there a second. She could tell he wanted to say something. You're actually from Hargrove? Like, you actually work there? Yes. I have a cousin who works there in the lab department. What's her name? Priya. Priya Nath. Olivia thought for a second. I know Priya. She's good. The young officer, his nameplate said Callister, looked at the cuffs on her wrists and then at the door behind him and then at his shoes. I'm sure this will get sorted out, he said, which was the thing you said when you knew it should get sorted out. but weren't sure it would. "I hope so," Olivia said. He left. She drank the water carefully with her hands still bound together and tried not to think about how much her knee hurt. The robbery investigation had its own momentum, separate from what was happening to Olivia on Dunmore Street. The actual suspect, Faye, a woman who matched the vague description in some ways, but who'd been caught on camera from 4 different angles and who had been apprehended half a mile from the scene, was in custody by 1:15 a.m. The word went out to units. Vaughn, for reasons that would later require explanation, was not in regular radio contact during the window between 12:50 and 1:45 a.m. The message that the suspect was in custody arrived at the Dunmore Street Precinct at 1:22 a.m. It was logged. No one immediately cross-referenced it to Vaughn's earlier call-in about the woman he'd detained. This was either an oversight or not, depending on who you asked later. Ruth Calloway had found out from Priya in the lab department, who'd heard from Callister, who'd gone on break and texted his cousin with the particular low-level moral unease of someone who needed to tell somebody that Olivia was at the Dunmore Precinct, cuffed, and had been there for over an hour. Ruth called 2 people in quick succession, the hospital's legal department and Olivia's emergency contact, which was listed as her brother Marcus in a city 3 hours away. Marcus Bennett picked up on the second ring, even though it was 1:40 a.m., because some people are wired that way. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. "Your sister was detained outside the hospital. She's been there about an hour and a half. We're working on getting someone there. Is she hurt?" Ruth hesitated 1 second too long. "I don't believe so. But I wanted you to know." Marcus said something under his breath that Ruth didn't catch and probably didn't need to. Then he said, "She still has that number? The one from her old unit?" "I don't know what that means." "She will," Marcus said. "Tell her she can use it." Ruth said she would relay that. She wasn't sure what she was relaying. Back in the precinct, Vaughn had been pulled into a conversation with Sergeant Morales that he was finding annoying. Morales was a careful man. 12 years on the job, the kind of career where he'd seen enough go sideways to know which signs to look for. He'd pulled up the badge scan records from Hargrove. He'd pulled up Olivia Bennett's background. He'd looked at both for about 4 minutes. "Vaughn," he said, "her badge shows she entered the building at 7:52 a.m. "I know." "And exited at 11:48 p.m. "I know." "The robbery was at 10:52. Vaughn was quiet for a second. "Descriptions matched." "The description was dark hair and medium build. You know how many people that covers?" "I was in the area. She was in the area. She was in a hospital parking lot in scrubs with her employee badge visible." Morales set down the file. "And the suspect is in custody. Came in 20 minutes ago." Vaughn looked at the desk. "I wasn't informed." "You weren't in contact." Morales looked at him steadily. "How long are you planning to hold her?" "I was following up. Derek." The use of his first name was deliberate. "Release her. Tonight. Now." Vaughn pushed his chair back and stood up. "She got mouthy. She asked you to adjust her cuffs." Morales had apparently also talked to Callister. "That's not mouthy. That's a medical complaint." He stood up. "I'll go with you." What happened next had several witnesses, all of whom would later give statements. Morales and Vaughn came through the door into the booking area where Olivia had been sitting for close to 2 hours. Morales took one look at her, and his expression did something complicated. She was sitting straight, the way she'd been sitting the whole time, but her left hand had the particular white waxy look of restricted circulation, and she was blinking slightly more than normal, which was the thing you did when you were managing pain and didn't want anyone to see it. Morales got the cuffs off himself. He didn't ask Vaughn to do it. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Sergeant Morales. I apologize for—" "The real suspect is in custody," Olivia said. Her voice was still even. "I know. I heard it on the radio at 1:22. Morales went still. "You've known for about 20 minutes." She looked at Vaughn. "I was waiting to see if anyone would come." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight to it. Callister was by the door, Burwell at the desk. 3 other officers who drifted in for various reasons and now found themselves unable to drift out without being obvious about it. Vaughn said, "You should have said something." Olivia looked at him. "I did say something. For 2 hours, I said things." She stood up slowly, and the fact that she winced slightly on her left knee was the only visible crack in any of it. "I'd like my bag and my badge back." Her bag was returned. Her badge was returned. Morales walked her to the front doors himself, which was either an apology or a precaution, or both. He gave her his card and said she was free to contact him about any follow-up. He said it carefully, in the way of someone who understood he was standing at the edge of something. "Who do I contact about filing a formal complaint?" Olivia asked. Morales gave her another card, the Civilian Oversight Board. "You have 30 days to eat." "I know the timeline." She looked at the card. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Ms. Bennett." He stopped her before she went through the door. The 3 a.m. air outside was cold, the kind of cold that smelled like rain coming. "I'm sorry this happened." She looked at him for a moment, not unkindly, but not warmly either, the look of someone deciding how much to say. "It happened," she said. "What matters is what comes after." She went through the door into the dark. Olivia sat in her car in the Dunmore Precinct parking lot for 6 minutes before she started the engine. She could feel the blood returning to her left hand properly, that particular pins and needles sensation, and she flexed her fingers twice and waited for it to pass. Her knee was worse than it had been before the shift. The fluorescent light in the lobby had given her the beginning of a headache. She pulled out her phone. 11 missed calls. Ruth, Marcus, Priya Nath, a number she didn't recognize. Another Ruth. 2 more Marcus. One from a number with a Washington, D.C. area code that she looked at for a long moment before setting the phone face down in her lap. She'd deal with that later. She started the car. Drove home through the empty streets of Black Ridge at 3:15 a.m., traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one in particular, the city doing that particular thing it did in the dead middle of the night when it forgot to pretend it was more than it was. She parked, walked up 3 flights, unlocked her apartment door. She stood in the middle of her kitchen for a while without turning on the light, and then she made tea because that was a thing her hands knew how to do without her brain being involved, and she sat at her kitchen table and drank it in the dark. The DC number called again at 3:47 a.m. She let it ring, watched it, let it go to voicemail, picked up the phone and played the voicemail. A man's voice, calm and precise, the way that certain kinds of training made a voice. Not military exactly, different, federal. She'd heard that register before. "Ms. Bennett, this is Agent Harlan Cross, Office of Civil Rights Enforcement. We're aware of the incident at Black Ridge PD tonight. This is not the first complaint involving that precinct in the last 18 months. If you're willing to speak with us, we'd like to understand what happened. You can call this number anytime. We'll pick up." Olivia set the phone down on the kitchen table. She drank the rest of her tea. The headache was worse now. The cuff marks on her wrists had faded to a dull pink, but she could still feel exactly where they'd been. Downstairs, someone's car alarm went off for 30 seconds and then stopped. She picked the phone back up and looked at the DC number for a long time. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she almost never called. The name wasn't a person's real name. It was a designation, a remnant of a system she'd stepped away from when she separated from service, but that she'd kept because Marcus had told her to keep it, and Marcus was usually right about these things. She didn't call it tonight. She put the phone down and went to bed, but she remembered the voicemail word for word. She'd been trained to do that too. In the morning, she would call Ruth. She would submit a formal complaint to the Civilian Oversight Board. She would document the cuff marks while they were still visible and take photographs. She would write down everything she remembered, time-stamped and detailed, because that was how you built a case, and she understood, lying in her dark apartment on the north side of Black Ridge, that this was going to be a case. What she didn't know yet, what none of them knew yet, not Vaughn, who was at home telling himself he'd been right about most of it, not Morales, who was writing something in a log he kept separately from the official record, not Ruth, who was still awake at her desk putting together an email she wasn't sure she'd send, not Agent Cross in Washington, who'd been watching the Black Ridge PD's complaint record for 4 months, was that the thing that had happened in a parking lot on a Tuesday night was not the beginning of a story. It was the moment a story that had already been building for a long time finally found the person who could push it to its end. Olivia Bennett turned off her lamp. In 3 days, a veteran officer named Garrett Foss 22 years on the force, would walk into the Dunmore Street precinct for a morning briefing and be dead before the coffee got cold. 3 days later, Garrett Foss hit the floor at 8:14 in the morning. He went down between the briefing room and the coffee station, mid-sentence, talking to no one in particular about a form he needed to file before noon. His body made a sound when it landed. That sound was what people remembered afterward. Not the thud exactly, more the wrongness of it. The way a person falling down is categorically different from any other kind of falling down. Officer Callister was closest. He got there first, and then immediately didn't know what to do with his hands. "Foss, hey, Foss!" The room went from noise to silence in about 2 seconds, and then to a different kind of noise. Someone knocked a chair back. Someone else said a name. A radio crackled. Sergeant Morales was out of his office in 4 strides and on one knee next to Foss before most people had fully processed what was happening. Foss was gray. That was the first thing Morales clocked. Not pale. Gray, the specific color of something going wrong underneath the surface. His lips had a bluish cast. His eyes were half open and not tracking. His chest was moving, but not well, the kind of shallow, irregular movement that meant the body was trying and not quite getting there. "Call an ambulance." Morales kept his voice flat and loud. "Now, somebody call." 3 people reached for phones simultaneously. Callister was already dialing. Someone else got on the radio. 2 officers were standing in the doorway of the briefing room, not coming in and not leaving, caught in that particular frozen state where the urgency was too immediate and too unfamiliar, and the brain just stopped issuing commands. Morales put 2 fingers to Foss's neck, found a pulse. Fast, weak, unsteady. Foss made a sound that wasn't a word. "Stay with me, Garrett. Come on." Foss didn't answer. His eyes drifted closed. "Somebody check the AED cabinet. Where is it? Go." Nobody moved for a long second that felt like longer, and then Burwell from the front desk was moving, and Callister was on the phone with dispatch telling them cardiac event, conscious but unresponsive. And the ambulance was 12 minutes out because of a multi-vehicle accident on the bridge, and 12 minutes was a fact that landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Morales had done CPR training. Every officer on the force had done CPR training. He started compressions and immediately was aware of how different it felt from the training. The weight of a real person, the resistance, the way Foss's chest felt under his palms, and kept going anyway, counting in his head, watching Foss's face, feeling the particular loneliness of someone who is doing the only thing they can and not knowing if it's enough. The room was full of people and nobody knew what to do. Then Callister said, "She's outside." Olivia had come to file her complaint in person. The Civilian Oversight Board's offices were on the 3rd floor of the municipal building 4 blocks away, but you had to submit initial documentation at the originating precinct, and she'd read the intake guidelines twice to make sure she understood the sequence. She had a folder in her bag, organized, tabbed, printed in the methodical way she'd learned to document things when documentation was the only weapon you had. Photographs of the cuff marks taken at 6 a.m. the morning after. A written timeline, time-stamped. Her badge scan records, which Ruth had pulled and printed. A copy of the radio log showing that the actual suspect had been taken into custody at 1:15 a.m., 7 minutes before Vaughn had come back to where Olivia was sitting. She'd parked down this block because the precinct lot felt like a place she didn't want to be anymore, and she was walking toward the main entrance when the door swung open and Callister came through it at something close to a run. He pulled up short when he saw her. "Miss Bennett?" He stopped. Something moved across his face. Some internal calculation she could see happening in real time. We have a situation. Inside." She heard it before she got to the door. Not the words, just the tone of a room in crisis. That particular frequency of voices that were trying to be controlled and not quite making it. She went through the door. She saw Morales on the floor with Foss, saw the compressions, saw the AED being carried across the room by Burwell, who didn't look like he'd used one before. Saw the 12-foot radius of frozen, useless people standing around a man who was dying. Her brain did a thing she'd stopped noticing it doing. It sorted. Very fast, without drama. Age of patient, apparent weight, skin color, visible symptoms, time since onset, quality of compressions being performed. She was moving before she was aware of deciding to move, and her bag was off her shoulder and on the floor, and she was dropping next to Morales in one motion. "Let me in." Morales looked at her, a fraction of a second, long enough to register who she was, what she was doing here, whether this was real. Then he pulled back. She checked the airway, tilted, checked, repositioned her hands on Foss's sternum, and felt immediately what the problem was. Morales had been doing it right, but the rate was slightly off and the depth was inconsistent, both of which were normal for someone working from memory without regular practice, and neither of which she had the time or inclination to say out loud. "Someone put the AED pads on him. Open his shirt. Now!" Burwell was already there. His hands were shaking slightly, but he got the pads positioned. Olivia kept compressions going, watching Foss's face, counting. "When did he go down?" 8:14, Callister said from behind her. She looked at the clock on the wall. 4 minutes. Inside the window. Barely. "A ED is ready," Burwell said. "Stop compressions." She pulled her hands back. "Analyzing." The machine did its thing. The room was absolutely silent in that way that only happens around machinery making a decision that matters. The analysis took 9 seconds. Shock advised. Do not touch the patient. Clear. Everybody stepped back. The shock delivered. Foss's body responded the way bodies did, that involuntary arching that was never not disturbing to witness, and Olivia was back on his chest before the movement finished, resuming compressions with the same rhythm, not slowing down, not speeding up, counting. Morales was next to her on his knees, not touching, watching. "You're a nurse," he said. Not a question. Combat medic first. She didn't look up. Nurse second. He didn't say anything after that. She ran 2 more cycles, checked pulse. Still there, slightly stronger, checked breathing, improving. The color in Foss's face was shifting away from gray toward something more like wrong pale, which was an upgrade. She kept going. "A ED is analyzing again," Burwell said. "Good, keep watching it." At 8 minutes, with the ambulance still 4 minutes out, Garrett Foss made a sound that was recognizably human, and his eyes opened and he looked at the ceiling of the Dunmore Street precinct with the confused expression of someone who'd gone somewhere and come back and wasn't sure where either place was. "Hey," Olivia's voice was level. "You're okay. Don't sit up. Help is on the way." Foss blinked. His mouth moved. "Don't try to talk," she said. "Just breathe." He breathed. But the ambulance arrived at 8:26. The paramedics took over with efficiency and noise and equipment, and Olivia stepped back and let them, which was also something she'd learned. Knowing when to hand off was as important as knowing when to step in. She stood near the wall and watched them work and felt the adrenaline begin to metabolize into something closer to exhaustion. The room was rearranging itself around what had just happened. Officers who'd been frozen were moving now, doing things, having the slightly artificial busyness of people working through shock. Callister was in the corner with his phone pressed to his ear. Burwell had sat down heavily in one of the briefing room chairs and was staring at the floor. Morales was looking at Olivia. She became aware of her hands. She should wash them. She should have gloves. She'd worked without gloves because there hadn't been gloves, and that was a thing she'd deal with separately. She was also aware that she was standing in the Dunmore Street precinct, where she'd spent 2 hours handcuffed in a plastic chair 3 days ago, and that the folder with her complaint documentation was still in her bag on the floor by the door where she'd dropped it. She went and picked up the bag. "Ms. Bennett," Morales crossed the room. He looked like he was carrying something heavy and trying not to show it. He should be okay," she said. "Assuming no underlying damage. The response time mattered. Because of you. Because you started compressions quickly." She was being precise on purpose. Not generous, precise. That bought the time. Morales studied her for a second. "Why did you come in today?" She reached into the bag and pulled out the folder and handed it to him. "To file this." He looked at the folder, at the tabs along the edge, at the thickness of it. He took it carefully, the way you took something you understood had weight to it. "I was going to say, given what just happened, if you need more time." "I've had 3 days," Olivia said. "That was enough time." "Talk." She washed her hands in the precinct bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. She looked fine. That was always the problem. She looked fine. She looked like someone who had things under control, which was a kind of armor she'd put on so many years ago that she'd forgotten what it was like not to be wearing it. Her left wrist had a faint yellowish mark where the cuff had been. She'd photographed it at multiple intervals, tracking the fade. Evidence. She dried her hands and went back out. Vaughn was there. He'd come in through the side door. She hadn't seen him arrive. And he was standing near Morales getting a fast account of what had happened. And when his eyes found her across the room, his expression did something complicated that settled into something she recognized as the specific discomfort of a person who's been caught being wrong. He walked toward her. She didn't move. "Bennett?" He stopped about 4 feet away. Something about the way he stood, the careful distance, the hands at his sides rather than near his belt, was different from 3 nights ago. "They told me what happened. With Foss." She waited. He opened his mouth, closed it. "That was... what you did was..." "I did what I'm trained to do," Olivia said. "That's all." He looked at the folder in Morales' hands across the room. He'd clocked it. She watched him clock it. "You filed." "I filed." He nodded slowly, with the careful nod of someone deciding how to feel about information they'd known was coming. "Okay." "Okay," she said. He didn't apologize. She hadn't expected him to. She turned and walked toward the exit, and nobody stopped her, and she went out through the front doors into the gray morning air and stood on the sidewalk for a second, breathing it in. Her phone was buzzing. "Ruth." She answered. "Olivia, I've been calling. Someone told me you went to the precinct." "I did. I'm done. I'm walking to my car. Are you okay?" She thought about Foss's face when he'd opened his eyes, the gray going out of it, the specific quality of someone coming back. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." A pause. "One of their officers had a cardiac event while I was there." Silence on Ruth's end for 2 full seconds. "What?" "He's alive. He's on his way to Hargrove, actually, so someone should know he's coming." She checked the time. "I'm coming in. Not for a shift, just... I need to check something." Ruth's voice had shifted into its supervisor register, the one that meant she was reorganizing rapidly. "Come in. We'll talk." Oh, the complaint documentation went into the system at 9:02 a.m. Morales logged it personally, which was slightly unusual. Typically, it would go to the desk sergeant, but he'd held onto the folder and walked it upstairs himself to the administrative section, and the woman who received it gave him a look he didn't explain. He went back to his office and sat at his desk for a while. He'd been at Dunmore for 11 years. He'd seen things get buried. He'd seen complaints filed and not acted on, and not acted on, and not acted on until they became embarrassments rather than problems, which was a different category that got handled differently. He'd filed his own documentation twice in his career on separate issues and watched one of them disappear into review that never concluded, and one of them result in a quiet reassignment that resolved nothing. He knew what happened to paperwork. He also had a video on his phone taken by someone in the precinct lot the night of Olivia Bennett's arrest that had been sent to him by Callister and that he'd watched 4 times. It was 43 seconds. It showed everything. He opened his laptop and composed an email to the Office of Professional Standards. He wrote it carefully, with the specific carefulness of someone who understood that the language of formal complaint needed to be both accurate and immune to the particular tools that people use to make things go away. He attached the time-stamped parking lot footage and the radio log and his own account of the 1:22 a.m. transmission and what happened after. He sent it at 9:17 a.m. Then he sat there and looked at his screen and wondered if that was enough, and knew it probably wasn't, and also knew that it was what he had. And those 2 things sat next to each other in him without resolving. Wait, the story broke in pieces. The parking lot footage went up on a local news channel's social media at 11:30 a.m. Someone had sent it to them anonymously, which was a word that covered several possible sources. And within 4 hours, it had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By evening, it was a national story. The header was straightforward. Nurse arrested after night shift, handcuffed in parking lot, real suspect in custody. Same night. The footage was unambiguous. 43 seconds of a woman in scrubs with a hospital badge clearly visible being forced onto the hood of her car, hands wrenched behind her. No aggression, no resistance. Comments filled up. Share counts climbed. The Blackridge PD's public information contacts started receiving calls before noon. Olivia found out the footage was circulating from Priya, who texted her a link at noon while Olivia was sitting in Ruth's office going through what had happened. She looked at the clip on her phone, watched it once, set the phone face down. "It's going to get loud," Ruth said. "I know. Do you have a lawyer?" "Not yet." Ruth slid a card across the desk. The name on it was Ethan Cole. Below it, civil rights practice, Blackridge and surrounding districts. "He's good," Ruth said. "He doesn't take cases he doesn't believe in." Olivia looked at the card. "How do you know him?" "Because 3 years ago, I filed a workplace discrimination complaint against this hospital's previous administration, and he was the person who helped me not get buried." Ruth's voice was completely level. "He's good." Olivia picked up the card. Cole's office called her back within 20 minutes of her first message, which told her something. She spoke to an assistant first, clinical, efficient, gathering basics, and then Cole himself came on the line. He had a voice that sounded like it was used to being precise. "Ms. Bennett, I've seen the footage." "So has most of the country, apparently." "That tends to happen." A pause. "Tell me what's not in the footage." She told him. All of it. The 2 hours in the chair, the tight cuffs, the 122 transmission, the complaint she'd filed that morning, the fact that she'd later asked Morales directly about the updated suspect information, and he'd confirmed that the transmission had been logged and that Vaughn had been off radio contact during the relevant window. Cole asked questions that were brief and specific, and she answered them the same way. When she was done, he was quiet for a second. "You said you have documentation." Time-stamped photographs, a written timeline, my badge scan records, a copy of the radio log, and a witness, Sergeant Morales, who can confirm the timeline. "Were you offered any kind of settlement or informal resolution before you filed the complaint?" "No, no one contacted me." "Okay." Another pause. Not thoughtful, more like calculating. "I need to be transparent with you about something. I've been watching the Blackridge PD complaint record for a while. Yours isn't the first." She'd suspected that. Agent Cross's voicemail had implied it. "How many?" 7 formal complaints in the last 18 months with similar patterns, 3 involving Officer Vaughn specifically. His voice was steady delivering this. None of them resulted in disciplinary action. The number settled in the room, or in her car, where she was sitting in a parking garage near Ruth's office because she'd needed somewhere quiet to make this call. 7. 7 people who'd gone through the same intake process, filed the same forms, waited. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I want you to know what you're walking into. If you engage me, we're not filing a complaint and waiting. We're building a case. That's different. That takes longer. It gets more complicated, and it's going to attract attention you may not want." She thought about the folder she'd handed Morales that morning. The photographs. The folder she'd built at 6 a.m. on 3 hours of sleep, because if you were going to do something, you should do it right. "I'm already in the attention," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "You are." A beat. "I'd like to meet with you in person. Can you come in tomorrow?" "I can come in today." He seemed to like that. 3 o'clock. By the time she was pulling out of the parking garage, the Blackridge PD had released a statement. She read it at a red light, which she knew was a bad idea and did anyway. The statement said the department took all complaints seriously and that the incident was under review, and that Officer Vaughn was a decorated member of the force with 9 years of service, and that the department remained committed to serving the community with integrity. She put her phone down. At 3 o'clock, she sat across from Ethan Cole in his office, which was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that had good natural light and no framed inspirational quotes, which she appreciated. Cole was 40-something, medium height, with the kind of face that didn't reveal much voluntarily. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and he used both. He asked her again, more slowly this time, to walk through everything. She did. He wrote. He asked good questions, specific ones, the kind that meant he'd already thought 3 steps ahead and was checking whether reality matched his map. At the end, he set down the pen. I want to ask you something that's not about the case. She waited. How are you doing? Not legally, actually. She wasn't expecting that. She let the silence sit for a second before she answered. I'm angry, she said, not at a level that makes me stupid, but I'm angry. Cole nodded. Good. The people who go in too calm make mistakes. He picked the pen back up. The people who go in too hot make different mistakes. He looked at her. You strike me as someone who's been in situations where the stakes were high and the margin for error was small. She looked at him. You've done background. Basic, military service record, honorable discharge, commendation for field medical service. I didn't go further without your permission. She looked at the window. The light was changing. Late afternoon, the specific gold of it that didn't last. What does my military record have to do with this? Probably nothing, legally, but it tells me something about who I'm working with. He closed the pad. I'll take the case. I want to be clear that this is going to be contested, it's going to be slow, and there will be moments where it looks like it's going nowhere. He looked at her steadily. Are you in for all of it? Yes, she said. Then we start Monday. She stood to leave. At the door she stopped, because something had been sitting at the edge of her mind since the morning, since the moment she'd looked at Foss's face, going from gray to something better, since she'd washed her hands in the precinct bathroom and looked at the cuff mark on her wrist. The officer who had the cardiac event today, she said. Foss. Do you know him? Cole looked up. By name. He's been on the force a long time. He was there, Olivia said. 3 nights ago, when I was brought in. I don't know if he did anything. I don't know if he saw anything. She paused. I'm not saying that's relevant. Cole was quiet for a moment. What are you saying? She thought about it. I'm saying people are more complicated than the institutions they work for. She opened the door. That's all. She drove home in the early dark, and the city looked different the way places sometimes did after something changed. Not the buildings, not the lights, just the feeling of moving through it, the sense of weight and possibility sitting in the same space. Her phone rang at 7:48 p.m. The DC number. She answered it this time. Ms. Bennett, Agent Cross's voice, precise and calibrated. Thank you for picking up. I was going to call you, she said. I know. I'm calling first because we don't have much time. A brief pause. We've been building something for 4 months. What happened to you 3 nights ago? We think it's connected to a pattern we've been tracking. Not just misconduct, something more organized. She was standing in her kitchen again. Same spot, same dark window, same cold tea she'd made, and not drunk. What kind of organized, she said. The kind that has records. Evidence that certain officers within the Blackridge PD have been systematically flagging individuals, manufacturing justification for arrest, and suppressing complaints before they reach review. Cross paused. We have most of what we need, but we needed a trigger, a case that was clean enough and public enough that it couldn't be buried. She stood very still. You're saying my arrest? I'm saying what happened to you fits a pattern we've been trying to bring into the light for a long time. His voice remained level. And now it's in the light. Outside her window, a car passed. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The city went on being the city. Ms. Bennett, Cross said, I need to know. Are you ready for what comes next? She looked at the cuff mark on her wrist. Almost gone now. Almost. Tell me what comes next, she said. 3 floors below her building, a black SUV that had been parked on Tanner Road for 40 minutes killed its lights and pulled quietly away from the curb. Cross didn't answer that night. He gave her a number, different from the one he'd called from, and told her to use it if anything changed in her immediate situation, and then he said he'd be in contact within 48 hours, and then he was gone. The call lasted 11 minutes. She stood in her kitchen afterward and replayed it the way she replayed things she needed to understand fully before she acted on them, sorting the language, the pauses, The things he'd said precisely versus the things he'd let sit at implication. The kind that has records. She went to bed. She slept badly and woke up at 5 a.m. and ran 3 miles in the dark, because that was what she did when her brain needed to stop narrating and just move. Her knee complained the whole way. She ran anyway. Monday came. She met with Ethan Cole for 2 hours, and they built a timeline together. Not the personal account she'd already written, but a legal one, structured differently, with specific language around duty of care and unlawful detention, and the documentation of the radio transmission and its non-response. Cole had already filed a formal public records request for Vaughn's personnel file. He'd already contacted the 3 prior complainants whose cases he knew about. He told her this with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone who'd been working before she arrived, which she appreciated. The national coverage hadn't died down. It had, if anything, thickened. The parking lot footage was everywhere. Her name was in headlines she didn't read because reading them didn't help anything. And people were saying things on both sides that were either too flattering or too hostile, and none of it was accurate enough to be useful. She'd given one statement through Cole, brief, factual, no embellishment, and declined everything else. TV requests, podcast requests, a book agent, somehow, who had found her personal email. She deleted that one twice. On Thursday, Garrett Foss was discharged from Hargrove Medical Center. She knew because Priya texted her. The cardiac team had kept him 4 days, done a full workup, found a previously undetected arterial blockage that had been building for years. He'd had a stent placed. He was going home with a monitoring device, a medication regimen, and instructions that he'd probably follow for about 3 weeks before he started cheating on the diet portion, which was what most people did. Olivia knew this not from cynicism, but from statistics. She didn't think much about Foss after that. Then he called her. But he got her number from Callister, apparently, who'd gotten it from Priya, and the chain of that felt appropriately sideways for how everything in this situation moved. She almost didn't answer. Unknown number, and she'd been getting those since the footage went public. But something about the area code made her pick up. "This is Foss," a voice rougher than she expected, still with the texture of someone who'd been horizontal for 4 days and was now vertical and finding it harder than anticipated. "Garrett Foss, I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you," she said. A pause. "The doctors tell me you kept me going until the ambulance got there." Morales started compressions. I continued them. I'm not calling about the medical thing. I mean, I am. I wanted to say thank you, but..." He stopped, started again. "I was there. 3 nights before, when Vaughn brought you in." She sat down slowly. "I know. I didn't do anything." The words sat there. She let them. "I saw your badge," Foss said. "I saw the scrubs. I knew something was off, and I didn't say anything, because Vaughn's Vaughn, and it was late, and I told myself Morales would sort it." His voice had the particular flatness of someone reporting a thing they were not proud of. "That's not an excuse." "No," she said. "It's not." Another pause. Longer. "I want to make a statement. To your lawyer, to the oversight board, to whoever. I want to go on record about what I saw that night." He cleared his throat, which sounded like it cost him something. "I don't know if it helps your case, but I know what I saw and I know what I didn't do, and I'd like to try to fix one of those." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the morning was overcast, the kind of flat gray light that made everything look slightly more serious than it was. "I'll give you Cole's number," she said. "Okay." "Foss." She paused. "Why didn't you do anything that night?" The silence stretched. She could hear him breathing, the slightly careful way of someone whose chest was still figuring out its new normal. "Because it was easier not to," he said finally. "That's all it was." She let that sit too. "Call Cole," she said, and gave him the number. The case broke open 11 days after her arrest, and it didn't break the way she'd expected. She'd been thinking of it as a building process, slow accumulation, documentation layered on documentation, formal channels grinding forward at the pace formal channels ground. Cole had told her to think long-term, and she'd adjusted her expectations accordingly. She was prepared for 6 months. She was prepared for longer. What she wasn't prepared for was Vaughn's department-issued laptop. The Office of Professional Standards had issued a subpoena for Vaughn's communications following Cole's formal filing, and someone in IT had complied faster than anyone anticipated, possibly because the person in IT had their own feelings about Derek Vaughn, or possibly because the records request was airtight and the alternative was obstruction, and at some point even institutional loyalty had a ceiling. Either way, the records came through. Cole called her at 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday. His voice had a different quality than she'd heard from him before. Not excited exactly, more like contained. The specific containment of someone holding something significant with both hands. "I need you to come in," he said. "Today. Now, if you can." She was there in 40 minutes. The records were extensive, not just communications surrounding her arrest. Those were damning enough, showing an internal message at 1:18 a.m. from a desk officer that clearly noted the suspect was in custody, sent to a group that included Vaughn's badge number, unanswered. But the records also showed a pattern going back 14 months. Vaughn had been using a combination of department channels and a personal messaging system, poorly secured, as it turned out, to coordinate with two other officers, a man named Trask and a woman named Polero, on what the messages called field discretion. The language was oblique. The meaning, when you read it as part of a sequence, was not. Individuals flagged, arrests made on thin justification, complaints that somehow never made it past the initial intake phase. One message, dated 7 months prior, that said, "Oversight board contact still solid. We're good." Cole set the printouts down on the desk between them. He didn't say anything for a second. "This is bigger than my arrest," Olivia said. "Significantly." He pressed 2 fingers to his temple briefly. "We have names in these records who've filed complaints that disappeared. We have at least one reference to a contact within the oversight board, which, if that holds up, means the suppression mechanism was internal and external simultaneously." He looked at her. "This is why Cross has been watching this precinct." She thought about Cross's voice on the phone, something more organized. "Have you contacted him?" "He contacted me, actually, this morning, before I called you. He's been monitoring the subpoena process." Cole leaned back slightly. "Federal involvement is being formally initiated. They have parallel evidence we haven't seen yet. They want to coordinate." Olivia looked at the printouts, at a message from Vaughn to Trask that said handled next to her badge number and a timestamp that was 1:08 a.m., 14 minutes before the suspect in custody transmission, 14 minutes before the information that should have freed her. "He knew," she said. "He had the information before the 1:22 transmission confirmed it. He had enough to question whether he had the right person." Cole's voice was careful. "Instead, he stayed the course." She looked at the message for a long moment, because backing down would have meant admitting he was wrong from the start. Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. The federal involvement changed the tempo of everything. Cross had a team, 4 investigators who came in quietly on a Tuesday, setting up at a temporary office space in the municipal building downtown, close enough to the precinct to be purposeful and far enough to be separate. They had subpoena power that Cole's civil suit didn't, and they moved differently, with the particular unhurried speed of people who understood that thoroughness and urgency could coexist if you were organized enough. Olivia met with them twice. She gave her account both times without variation because it was the same account. She'd written it at 6 a.m. 3 days after her arrest, and everything she said since then matched it, because that was what happened when you told the truth. Cross ran the meetings. He was exactly what she'd expected from his voice. Precise, low drama, with the specific quality of someone who had learned that the facts were enough if you gathered them correctly. The second meeting, Cross paused at the end and looked at her across the table. "You saved Foss," he said. It wasn't entirely a non sequitur. "I performed a medical intervention," she said. "He's given a statement, a detailed one." Cross kept looking at her. "He corroborated 3 things in your timeline that weren't in any of the written records." She'd wondered if Foss's account would hold up. "Good. He's also named 2 officers he witnessed discussing your case that night who weren't previously in our records." Cross's expression didn't shift. He's been cooperative in a way that's been useful. She thought about Foss on the phone, his rough voice saying, "I told myself Morales would sort it." The specific honesty of a person who decided late that honesty was less costly than what he'd been carrying. "He's trying to fix something he can't fully fix," she said. "Most people don't try at all." She acknowledged that without answering it. On the drive home from the second federal meeting, she got a call from Cole. He didn't open with a greeting. "Trask broke," he said. She pulled to the side of the road. "When?" "This morning. Federal investigators brought him in separately. He didn't know what they had. When they showed him the message records, he lawyered up for about 4 hours and then his lawyer called and said he wanted to cooperate." Cole's voice was tight with controlled energy. "He's confirmed the Oversight Board contact. He's named the person." The Oversight Board contact. The mechanism that had made 7 complaints disappear. Who? A board administrator named Wells. He's been receiving it's not clear yet if it was money or favors or leverage. The investigators are still working through it. But Trask says Wells flagged incoming complaints and slowed the review process long enough for cases to go cold. Cole paused. "Olivia, this goes up further than Vaughn." She sat with the car running on the side of the road. A truck passed. Another car. The ordinary movement of a city that didn't know what was happening inside its own infrastructure. "How much further?" she said. "Trask says Polero has communications with the deputy chief's office." A pause. "We don't have those yet. The investigators are working on it." The deputy chief. She thought about the statement the department had released. Officer Vaughn is a decorated member of the force with 9 years of service, and thought about who had approved that language and why. "Cole," she said, "is any of this going to hold? Trask's a cooperative witness, that's something, but it holds if we keep building," he said. "The message records are independent of Trask's testimony. The federal subpoenas are independent. Foss is independent. Your documentation is independent." His voice settled. "These aren't single points. They corroborate each other. That's how a case survives." She pulled back onto the road. The city moved around her, indifferent and continuous. That night she called Marcus, not because she needed anything specific, just because she needed to talk to someone who knew her from before all of it. Before Blackridge PD and Hargrove and the parking lot footage and the federal investigators, someone who knew her from the time when she was just a kid who decided to join the army and hadn't known yet what that would make her. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "How bad is it?" he said. "It's not bad. It's actually—" She stopped. "It's moving." "Moving how?" "There's a federal investigation. There's a cooperative witness inside the department. There's documentation that covers more than what happened to me." She leaned against her kitchen counter. Her knee was better today. Small mercies. "It's moving." Marcus was quiet for a second. "You doing okay?" "Yeah." "You eating?" Marcus. "I'm asking." "Yes, I'm eating." She almost smiled. "Stop. He stopped himself. Then, "You saved somebody. In the middle of all this, you went in there and saved one of them. He needed help." "I know, that's—" His voice did something that he controlled quickly. "That's who you are. I just want you to remember that. Whatever happens with the case, whatever they say or don't say, that's who you are." She didn't answer. Outside, the city made its sounds. A long way away, somewhere in the direction of downtown, a siren rose and faded. "I'll call you Sunday," she said. "You better." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a while. The lights were off and she hadn't turned them on, and the apartment was lit by what came in through the windows. Street light, the glow of the building across the way, the ambient light of a mid-sized city that never went fully dark. 3 things happened in quick succession over the next 18 hours, and the combination of them shifted the entire trajectory of what had been building. The first was that the Blackridge Courier ran a piece, sourced from what it called multiple individuals with knowledge of the investigation, detailing the existence of the internal messaging system and naming Trask as a cooperative federal witness. The piece was careful legally, hedged in the right places, but the information it contained was specific enough that by morning it had been picked up nationally. The second was that Garrett Foss, from his living room in the east side of Black Ridge, gave an interview to a local TV station. He sat in a chair with the monitoring device visible on his wrist, and he looked directly at the camera and said, "She saved my life. And what happened to her was wrong. I was there, and I know what I saw, and I should have said something sooner, and I didn't, and I'm saying it now." The clip was 40 seconds long. It had 4 million views by the following afternoon. The third was the message Olivia received at 6:47 a.m. from a number she didn't recognize, routed through an anonymized system that contained no words, only a series of file names and a temporary access link that expired in 6 hours. She opened the link. The files were internal department communications, not from Vaughn's laptop. Different source, different dates, going back further. Messages between Polero and an address in the deputy chief's office that laid out, with the particular explicitness of people who'd been doing something wrong for long enough to stop being careful about it, exactly how the suppression system had worked, who had benefited from it, and, most significantly, a list of 14 names. 14 people. 14 complaints that had been deliberately buried. She stared at the screen. Her hands were completely still. The list went back 3 years. Some of the names she recognized from Cole's files. Most she didn't. All of them had been through some version of what she'd been through, and all of them had filed, and all of them had been made to disappear into a process designed to protect the people who had harmed them. She forwarded the link to Cole immediately, then to Cross's secure contact. Then she sat at her kitchen table and looked at the names on the list for a long time. 14 people. Her phone rang. Cole. She answered before the first ring finished. "Tell me you got it," she said. "I got it." His voice was different, not contained anymore. Something had broken through the containment. "Olivia, this is the deputy chief's office. This is..." A pause. "We need to move fast before that link expires. I'm on with Cross right now. We need you on a call in 20 minutes. "I'll be there." "The 14 names," Cole said. "We need to find them. Before this goes public, before anyone has a chance to..." "I know," she said. 20 minutes, he said, and was gone. She got up, put the kettle on out of muscle memory, then turned it off because there was no time, found her shoes, her keys, her jacket. She was out the door in 4 minutes. She was at the bottom of her building's stairs when her phone buzzed again. Not Cole, not Cross. A text from an unknown number, 6 words. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and read the text 3 more times. "They know you have the files." 6 words from a number that didn't exist in any contact list, routed through a system designed to leave no origin. She thought about who could have sent it. Someone inside, obviously. Someone who'd seen something shift in the last hour. Someone who was watching movement on a file system or a communication channel and understood what that movement meant and had made a choice about what to do with that understanding. She was outside in 30 seconds. Not running. She didn't run because running looked like panic and panic drew attention. But moving with the particular controlled speed of someone who'd learned to move through uncertain environments. She got to her car, got in, locked the doors, called Cole. "I got a text," she said when he picked up. 6 words. "They know you have the files. Unknown number." A 3-second silence. "Are you in your apartment?" "My car, downstairs." "Drive to my office. Don't go anywhere else. I'm calling Cross right now." His voice had shed whatever professional containment it usually operated in. "Olivia, drive." She drove. The city at 7 a.m. had its particular rhythm. Commuters, school buses, delivery trucks, the ordinary machinery of a weekday morning doing its indifferent work. She moved through it and watched her mirrors and thought about the text. They know. Present tense. Not they found out or they're looking. They know. Someone had seen the access, or seen the forward, or seen something that told them the files had moved. The link had been live for less than 40 minutes. Cole was at his office when she arrived, jacket on, legal pad already filled with notes she couldn't read from the doorway. Cross was on speaker on Cole's desk, his voice filling the room with that controlled federal cadence. "The source of the leak is traceable on their end," Cross was saying. "Whoever sent you that warning took a risk doing it. It means someone inside saw the files move and chose to protect you rather than report it up." "Do we know who?" Cole said. "Working on it. Not important right now. A pause. What's important is that the files are secured. Olivia, you forwarded to both of us before you left? Yes. Good. We have them. The link is expired now anyway. We captured everything before the window closed. Cross's voice stayed level. The question is what they do next. Well, they try to discredit the source, Cole said. They claim the files were altered, illegally obtained. They can claim all they want. The records match what Trask already confirmed independently. Cross paused. They can also try to create a parallel narrative, move against Olivia's credibility directly. She was standing by Cole's window. The street below was normal. What does that look like? Digging into your past, probably. Looking for anything that complicates your profile. Military record, financial history, personal relationships. Cross said it the way he said most things. Factual, not softened. It's standard procedure when a case turns on a witness who's also a victim. Let them dig, Olivia said. Your record is clean, Cole said, not quite asking. She looked at him. My record is clean. Then we keep moving. Cole picked up the legal pad. The 14 names. I've already identified 8 of them from prior filings. I need your help on the other 6, Cross. If federal records have any overlap, we have 4 of the remaining 6, Cross said. The last 2 were running now. Olivia looked at the list she'd printed before leaving her apartment, folded twice in her jacket pocket. 14 people. She thought about what it meant to file a complaint in good faith, to go through the intake process, to document and timestamp and show up with your evidence and your account, and then to watch it disappear, to wait for a response that never came, to eventually understand that the system you'd trusted to hold someone accountable had been specifically designed, in this instance, to protect the people who'd hurt you. We need to contact them before this goes fully public, she said. They should know what's happening before they see it on the news. Both men were quiet for a second. That's, Cole started. They were already failed once by a process they didn't control, she said. They shouldn't find out they've been vindicated the same way. Cross came back on. Agreed. We'll coordinate outreach. Some of them may be material witnesses. We'll need their cooperation regardless, but the priority right now is getting ahead of the Deputy Chief's office. Deputy Chief Warren Aldis had been in his position for 6 years. He was not a man who made mistakes visibly, which was different from not making mistakes. He made them behind layers of process, through other people's hands, through official channels that had been quietly adjusted to favor specific outcomes, through a system of favors and accommodations that had grown slowly enough that no single moment of its growth had looked like the corruption it had become in aggregate. He found out about the files at 6:53 a.m., 14 minutes after the link was accessed. The person who told him was Polero, who had been awake since 5 and who had a monitoring alert set on a specific server access path that she'd established 3 months ago after the first federal inquiry had appeared on their radar. When the alert fired, she'd looked at the access log, seen the file names, seen the forwarding activity, and called Aldis on his personal cell. Aldis listened, didn't speak for a moment, then said, "How many files?" "The full communications thread, 6 months. Trask's name is in those threads, Getz. Yes. And mine. Adjacent to yours. The direct communications are between Polero." She stopped. "Between me and your office address, not your direct line." The distinction, Aldis understood, would not hold up. Who else has seen this? Unknown. The link was accessed once from an IP that's been routed through 3 proxies. We can't trace it cleanly. He thought. He was good at thinking quickly. It was one of the things that had made him useful over the years, and one of the things that had perhaps made him careless in the ways that careful people sometimes grew careless when they stopped believing that consequences applied to them. "I need to talk to Wells," he said. "Wells is already compromised. Trask named him." "I know." He paused. "Get me an attorney. Not the department's. Mine." He hung up. In the 3 hours that followed, he made 6 more calls, none of which would help him, because what Aldis didn't know yet, what he'd have no way of knowing until it was too late to be useful to him, was that his personal cell had been under a federal tap for 11 days. The calls were recorded. Their content, when added to the file records, removed the last ambiguity from what the investigators had been building. Cross listened to the first two calls in real time. He looked at the agent across from him and said, "We move today." The arrest began at 11 a.m. Not dramatically. Federal operations rarely were, in Olivia's limited experience of them. No cameras, no announcement. Vaughn was taken into custody at the Dunmore Precinct itself, which had a particular rightness to it that she thought about later. Polero was picked up at her apartment. Trask had already surrendered through his attorney. Wells, the oversight board administrator, was escorted out of the municipal building by two agents who walked very close to him and said very little. Aldis was last. He came in voluntarily, through his attorney, which was both predictable and irrelevant. The federal building on Clement Street had a side entrance that his attorney had presumably requested, but there was a photographer from the Courier stationed there anyway. Someone had made a call, origin unclear, and the image of Warren Aldis in his civilian clothes, attorney at his shoulder, walking into the federal building at 2:14 p.m. on a Wednesday, was on the Courier's website by 2:30 and national by 3. Olivia was in Cole's office when it went up. She was on her fourth cup of coffee and had eaten half a sandwich at some point, and she looked at the image on Cole's laptop and didn't feel what she'd expected to feel, which was satisfaction. What she felt was more complicated, something closer to exhaustion that had a relieved quality to it, the particular emotional signature of a long thing finally reaching a point that had been visible for a while but kept receding. Cole was on the phone. He'd been on the phone most of the day, and the calls had the rhythm of a case that was expanding rather than contracting, each one opening onto new information or new coordination or a new name that needed to be added to the map they were building across his whiteboard. "Two more names on the 14 just confirmed as willing to give statements," he said when he hung up. "That's 11 of 14 who are actively cooperating. And the other 3? One can't be located yet. One has an attorney who's being cautious. One—" He stopped. "One died. 18 months ago. Heart attack." He said it flat, factual, the way you said things that sat at the intersection of tragedy and complexity without making them dramatic. Olivia absorbed that. 18 months ago was before she'd been arrested, before any of this had a shape. Someone had filed a complaint, had it buried, and had died waiting for it to matter. "We get his case reopened," she said. "Already in the filing." She nodded. "There's something else," Cole said. He picked up a printout from his desk. The Foss interview, the clip, has created a particular problem for the department's initial narrative. The Public Affairs Office put out a statement this morning trying to characterize his comments as the emotional response of a trauma patient, and he paused. Foss responded. "What did he say?" "He gave a second interview, 30 minutes, on camera, sitting at his kitchen table. He walked through the night of your arrest in specific detail, named officers he saw, named what he witnessed, named what he didn't do." Cole looked at the printout. He said, and I'm reading this directly, "I've spent 22 years on that force, and I thought the institution was worth protecting. I was wrong. The institution protected itself. That's not the same thing." The room was quiet for a second. "How's the response?" she said. "The clip has 8 million views as of an hour ago." Cole set the printout down. "Foss's phone is apparently broken. He's been fielding calls since 6 this morning, and at some point he just stopped answering." She thought about Foss in his kitchen with the monitoring device on his wrist, 22 years of work rearranging itself in his understanding. The cost of that. "Is he okay?" "His daughter says he is." Cole gave her a brief look. "You asked about a man who testified in your case." "He's not a chess piece," she said. Cole held up a hand. "I know. I'm noting it." He moved to the whiteboard. "Now, the press conference." Cole had scheduled it for the following morning. Not a dramatic production, a statement from Olivia, brief and specific, followed by questions that he would help navigate. They'd discussed the format 3 times over the previous 2 days, and she'd pushed back on 2 elements and accepted 2, and they'd landed somewhere that felt honest rather than managed, which was what she'd insisted on. She spent the evening in her apartment writing her own version of what she wanted to say. Not the legal statement, that was Cole's domain, and he was better at it. Her version. What it actually felt like to stand in that parking lot, what she'd been thinking in the plastic chair at the Dunmore Precinct at 2 a.m., what she'd thought about, lying in the dark afterward, that had made her get up and build a folder and show up. She wrote 3 pages, and then cut them to 1, and then cut that to half a page, and then looked at what remained and thought it was probably close to right. Her phone had been buzzing with varying frequency all day. Marcus, twice. She'd texted back both times. Ruth, once. Priya, 3 journalists she didn't know whose numbers Cole had told her to ignore, and 1 at 9:17 p.m. from Cross. She called him back. 2 things, he said. Aldis's attorney has indicated he may want to cooperate. We're not engaging that conversation yet, but it's on the table. And the second thing? The department's inspector general has opened an independent review, separate from the federal investigation. That's the first internal review of Dunmore in 6 years. A pause. It means the pressure is coming from outside and inside simultaneously. That changes how quickly things move. How quickly? Disciplinary proceedings for Vaughn could begin within 60 days, possibly faster given the public profile of the case. Cross paused. I want to be honest with you. The criminal prosecution timeline is longer. Federal cases move slowly even when the evidence is strong. You should expect months before any trial, possibly longer. She'd known this. Cole had told her. It was still different hearing it as a settled fact rather than a projection. I understand. You're doing well, Cross said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. More a professional assessment, the kind offered because it was accurate rather than because it was comforting. You've been consistent, documented, and you haven't overreached. That matters in a case like this. I know what I saw, she said. That makes consistency easy. He almost did something with his voice that might have been the precursor to a laugh. Get some sleep before tomorrow. She did, eventually. Not much, but some. The press conference was on the steps of the municipal building at 10 in the morning. There were more cameras than she'd expected, which she should have expected but hadn't quite calibrated for. She stood at the small podium Cole had arranged and looked at the assembled press and the cluster of people who'd gathered on the sidewalk, some deliberately, some just passing through and stopping, and felt the particular quality of a moment that had weight in both directions, backward into what had happened and forward into what came next. She read from the half-page she'd written and then set it aside. I came to file a complaint, she said. That's what started this. Not because I thought it would lead here, because it was the right thing to do and because nobody was going to do it for me. She looked at the cameras. 14 people filed complaints before me. Their cases went nowhere. I don't know yet whether mine would have gone anywhere either if the circumstances had been different. If the footage hadn't circulated, if the timing hadn't put me in that building when Garrett Foss needed help. I've thought about that a lot. A quiet settled over the crowd. Not silence. City sounds continued, traffic, wind, but the particular attentive quality of people choosing to listen. What I know is that a system designed to hold people accountable was being used to protect the people who needed to be held accountable. And that's not a problem with one officer or one precinct. That's a structural failure that requires a structural answer. She paused. I want the criminal cases to proceed. I want every complaint on that list reopened. I want the reforms that prevent this from being rebuilt in a different form down the road. She paused again. And I'd like to go back to work. Someone in the crowd made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite something else. She took 4 questions. Cole fielded 2 of them. She answered 2 directly. The whole thing was 22 minutes. She walked back into the municipal building afterward with Cole at her shoulder and let the doors close behind her and stood for a moment in the relative quiet of the lobby. That was good, Cole said. It was honest, she said. Sometimes those are the same thing. The week that followed had its own exhausting momentum. Cole filed the civil suit formally, naming Vaughn, Polero, Trask, Wells, and the department itself as defendants, with the federal investigation running parallel. The suit was comprehensive: wrongful detention, excessive force, civil rights violation, and, based on the communication records, conspiracy to suppress complaint. The department's response was the particular non-response of an institution that understood it was losing but hadn't yet decided how to lose. Their public communications shifted from defending Vaughn to a more general language about due process and ongoing review. The police union put out a statement supporting Vaughn that was picked up and broadly criticized. 2 city council members called publicly for the chief to step down. The chief issued his own statement that contained the word accountability 7 times and committed to nothing specific. Olivia watched all of it from a careful distance. She'd gone back to Hargrove the day after the press conference. Not to her regular shift schedule. She and Ruth had agreed to modify that until the case was further along, because the press attention made the floor complicated and the patients didn't need complication. But she was in the building, doing what she could do. It helped to have something concrete to do with her hands. On the 11th day after the arrests, Garrett Foss came to Hargrove. Not as a patient, he showed up in the lobby with his coat on and his monitoring device visible on his wrist and a slightly uncertain quality about him, like someone who'd decided to do something and was committed to it but wasn't sure how the reception would go. Priya called Olivia from the desk. "There's a man here," Priya said. "He says his name is Garrett Foss." Olivia came down. He looked better than she'd expected, still carrying the physical remnants of what had happened, the slight careful way of someone who'd had a stent placed and was learning to trust their own body again, but present. Alert. He shook her hand with a grip that was deliberate. "You didn't have to come here," she said. "I know." He looked around the lobby. The bustle of it, the movement of staff and patients, and the ordinary, urgent life of a hospital floor. "I wanted to see where you work." She waited. "I testified yesterday," he said, "to the IG's office. Full account, everything I saw. Named everyone I could name." He paused. "They asked me why I waited until now. The investigator asked me that directly." "What did you tell them?" "The truth." He looked at her. "That I was afraid. Not of them specifically, just afraid of the cost." He said it without apparent shame, which was a kind of courage of its own. 22 years on the force. You build a life inside that institution. You know what it costs to go against it. I knew. I chose not to pay it for a long time. And now? He met her eyes. Now somebody else paid it for me, and then saved my life. So, he shrugged slightly. Late is still something. She thought about the 13 others on the list, the one who hadn't made it. "Yes," she said. "It is." He left. She watched him go through the lobby doors and out into the afternoon. The formal charges came down 17 days after the arrests. Cross called her first, as he'd said he would. Federal prosecutors had filed. Vaughn faced charges of civil rights violation, unlawful detention, and conspiracy. Polero faced the same plus obstruction. Trask had a cooperating plea agreement in negotiation. Wells faced 3 counts of misconduct in public office and 1 count of evidence suppression. Aldis, and here Cross's voice shifted almost imperceptibly, faced the most serious charges: conspiracy to deprive civil rights, abuse of official authority, and 3 counts related to the systematic suppression of complaints over a period of 4 years. 4 years, she said. The earliest documented instance of deliberate complaint suppression in the records we have is 4 years and 2 months ago, Cross said. There may be older cases. The review is ongoing. She thought about that number. 4 years of people filing complaints and being made to feel like they'd imagined what happened to them. 4 years of the mechanism running in the background, maintained by men who went home at the end of the shift and had dinner and watched television and believed, presumably, that what they were doing was sustainable. What happens now? She said. The criminal process moves forward. Cole's civil suit is on a separate track. That will take longer. The IG report is expected in 6 to 8 weeks. The police chief... Cross paused. The chief will be resigning tomorrow. The mayor's office is announcing in the morning. She hadn't known that. Did you know that was coming? We knew it was a conversation. A pause. It became a decision yesterday afternoon. She sat with that. The chief's statement with its 7 uses of the word accountability. The man behind it, making calculations, finally reaching the number where the calculation came out on the other side. Cross, she said, the anonymous text. They know you have the files. Did you ever find out who sent it? A brief silence. We have a strong idea, but you're not going to tell me. I'm going to say that the person who sent it is someone inside the department who took a significant personal risk, and that they've been quietly cooperating with the investigation in a way that's been valuable, and that their identity is something we're protecting as actively as we can. He paused. I'll also say that sometimes people inside broken institutions do the right thing. Not often enough, but sometimes. She thought about Callister and his awkward cup of water, about Morales and the cuff removal and the card he'd handed her, about Foss in the lobby of Hargrove with his monitoring device and his slightly uncertain bearing. I know, she said. The civil suit moved faster than Cole had projected. 3 weeks in, the city's attorneys approached with a preliminary settlement offer. Cole called her with it, and she listened to the number and the terms, and then said, "What does it require me to give up?" "It's non-disclosure on the settlement amount, not on the facts, not on the case." "The 14 names. The other complainants. Does the settlement affect their cases?" "No, their cases are independent. The settlement, if you take it, covers your specific civil claim." She thought. Counter. I want 2 things added to any settlement. First, a formal public acknowledgement from the city. Not just a legal settlement, a public statement that what happened to me was wrong, and that the department's complaint suppression system was a deliberate institutional failure. Second, a commitment to individual review of every case on the 14-name list. Cole was quiet for a moment. The public acknowledgement is unusual. I know. They may not agree. Then we go to trial. Another pause, shorter. I'll relay it. They agreed. Not in 48 hours. It took 8 days of back and forth and 2 counterproposals, and 1 moment where the city's attorneys appeared to walk back from the public acknowledgement, and Cole sent her a message that said holding, and she replied, hold. And they held, and the attorneys came back. The final agreement included both terms. The public acknowledgement was scheduled for a city council meeting. A formal statement, read into the record. Not a press conference, not a media event. A statement read into the official record of the city government. Cole had suggested that, and she'd liked it for its lack of spectacle. Evidence, properly filed, was more durable than drama. She was in Cole's office reviewing the final language when the call came in that changed the shape of the afternoon. Cole's phone first, then hers, Cross's voice, and she heard in it something that wasn't quite excitement but was adjacent to it. The controlled register of someone who'd just gotten confirmation of something they'd been working toward for a long time. Aldis's cooperation deal fell apart, Cross said. He withdrew his attorney's overture this morning. We think he had an internal source telling him the federal case had evidentiary gaps. That source was wrong, significantly wrong, but Aldis acted on it. A pause. So he's decided to fight. Cole said, Normally that would be a complication, Cross said, but because he withdrew the cooperation overture after we'd already agreed to make certain records available in those conversations, we now have documentation of his intent to obstruct. A silence in Cole's office. He added to the charges against himself, Cole said slowly. Substantially. Cross paused. There's more. The Inspector General's report came out this morning. 36 pages. We have a copy. You should know that on page 19 it names 7 additional cases that fall within the documented suppression pattern that were not on the original 14-name list. Olivia went very still. 7 more. Bringing the confirmed total to 21 individuals whose complaints were deliberately suppressed. Cross's voice had the particular cadence of someone reading from a document. The IG is recommending immediate reinstatement of review for all 21 cases, mandatory structural reform of the complaint intake process, and external oversight for a period of no less than 3 years. 21 people. She'd thought it was 14. It had always been more than 14. It was always, in cases like this, more than whatever number you found first. Cole was watching her. She kept her expression level because she needed a moment before she put words to what was happening inside her chest right now. Not triumph, not yet. Something rawer than that. The feeling of a number that represented human beings who had gone through something and been left there. And the specific, complicated quality of understanding that you had been the person whose case had finally been the one that stuck. 21, she said. 21 confirmed, Cross said. The review may find more. She picked up the settlement language she'd been reading before the call. The public acknowledgement clause, a deliberate institutional failure that affected multiple individuals over a period of years. They'd written it to cover more than just her case. Cole had insisted on that language, and she'd agreed. She looked at it now and thought, they didn't know how right they were being. Cross, she said, the IG report. Is it public? Being released to media and she heard him check something. 22 minutes. She looked at Cole. He looked at her. We need to get ahead of it, she said. I'm already drafting, Cole said, reaching for his keyboard. Her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. The number she recognized now as Foss's daughter's cell, the one Priya had given her. Dad saw the IG report preview. He's okay. He wanted me to tell you, you did it. She read it twice. Set the phone down. Outside Cole's window, the afternoon was doing its late autumn thing, that particular slant of light that didn't last, going gold at the edges and making ordinary buildings look briefly significant. A bus moved on the street below. Someone walked a dog. The city went on being itself, as cities did, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening in the rooms above it. But 22 minutes from now, the report would be public. And in the morning, the police chief would resign. And the charges against Aldous, now heavier, would be filed again in their amended form. And the 21 names would become a matter of official record, which was different from being a matter of someone's documented account, which was different from being a complaint that vanished into a system designed to make complaints vanish. It was not over. Cole had told her 3 times this week that it was not over, that over was a long way away, that criminal proceedings were slow and appeals were real, and the work of the next year would be grinding and would require her to show up for it. She believed him. She was prepared for it, but something had shifted. She looked at her phone, at Foss's daughter's text. At the time, 19 minutes before the report went public. She picked up her pen and went back to reviewing the settlement language because there was still work to do and the afternoon wasn't getting longer, and the habit of staying on the task in front of her was one she'd built over years in conditions that made this look manageable, and she wasn't about to break it now. 14 minutes later, Cole's phone rang again. He listened. His face changed. He set the phone down, looked at her. The courier just got a document package, he said. Anonymous. Not from our side. We don't know the source. He paused. It's internal communications from the deputy chief's office going back 6 years, further than anything we have. He looked at the desk. Olivia, there are names in there we haven't seen before. More officers and... He stopped. Say it, she said. And 2 city council members. The room was very quiet. 6 years, she said. At least. She thought about the person who'd sent the anonymous text. They know you have the files. Someone inside who took a risk. Someone who'd been watching for a long time and had decided, finally, that the watching was no longer enough. Someone who had more than she knew and had been waiting for the right moment and had now decided the moment was here. She thought about 21 names becoming something larger. She thought about the shape of what she'd walked into without knowing its full dimensions. The thing that had started with a parking lot and a pair of too tight handcuffs and a hospital badge that a man had looked at and decided not to see. Cole's phone rang again. Then hers. She answered. It was Cross. His voice had lost its calibration entirely. For the first time since she'd known him, he sounded like a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't fully anticipated. How many names are in the package? She said before he could speak. A pause. 47, Cross said. She said it back to him not because she hadn't heard it, but because saying it out loud made it real in a different way than hearing it. Cross confirmed it without elaboration. 6 years of communications. 47 names across multiple ranks, 2 city council offices, 3 civilian oversight positions. The package was comprehensive in the way that only something assembled over a long period of time could be comprehensive. Not a single leak, but an archive, organized, indexed, clearly prepared by someone who had known for a long time that this day would come, and had been getting ready for it. Who put this together? Cole said. He was reading from his screen now, the courier having sent him the document package directly given his role as counsel of record. We don't know yet, Cross said, but whoever it was had access to 6 years of internal communications and the patience to organize them. That's not an outsider. That's someone who lived inside that system for a long time and documented it. Olivia thought about the anonymous text. They know you have the files. The person who'd sent that warning had bought her 12 minutes. The person who'd assembled this package had spent 6 years. They might be the same person. They might not. She wasn't sure it mattered as much as what the package contained. The 2 council members, she said. Who are they? Cross named them. She didn't recognize either name, which meant they weren't the ones who'd been publicly visible on the issue. They were the ones who'd been quiet, which was its own kind of answer. What happens now? Cole said. Now the U.S. Attorney's Office gets involved at a level they haven't been before, Cross said. This isn't a precinct-level case anymore. It hasn't been for a while, honestly, but now it's inarguable. A pause. The amended charges will take some time to prepare. But Aldis, Vaughn, Polero, Wells, their situations don't get better from here. She was still holding her pen. She set it down. Cross, she said. The people in that package who aren't already charged, the council members, the other officers. How long before they know the package is out? Given that it went to the courier, a few hours at most. Then they'll lawyer up. Most of them already have attorneys on retainer, Cross said dryly. But yes. Will it matter? The document record is independent of their cooperation. Correct. The package corroborates what we already have and extends it significantly. Their cooperation would accelerate the process. Their non-cooperation doesn't stop it. A brief pause. It just makes it slower and more expensive for them, ultimately. She picked her pen back up. There was still work to do. There would be work to do for months. She'd accepted that, and she meant the acceptance, not the way people meant it when they said they accepted something and then were surprised each time it came due. I'll be available when you need me, she said, and let Cross go. The IG report hit at exactly the time Cross had predicted, and the courier ran both the report and the anonymous document package simultaneously, and the combination produced the particular kind of media event that feeds on its own momentum. Each new outlet picking it up and adding context, and the context generating more questions, and the questions generating more coverage, until by evening it was the lead story everywhere that covered national news. The names from the package were not fully published. The Courier's editorial judgment, backed by legal counsel, was to name the already charged individuals and refer to the others as additional individuals currently under federal review. That restraint lasted approximately 4 hours before 2 other outlets published the full list without the same editorial framework, and at that point the restraint became moot. The city council called an emergency session at 7 p.m. Olivia watched the first 30 minutes of it on her phone, sitting at her kitchen table, and then turned it off because watching politicians perform urgency about a crisis they'd been positioned to prevent for 6 years was something she could only absorb in small doses. She knew what mattered. The record was established. The charges were filed and would be extended. The process would continue with or without her watching it on a screen. She called Marcus instead. He answered on the first ring again. She thought about how many times over the past few weeks she'd called him, and he'd answered on the first ring, and she thought that this was a kind of love that didn't announce itself and didn't need to. 47 names, she said. I saw. His voice had the sound of someone who'd been watching the news for hours. Are you okay? I'm okay. She meant it. I'm tired, but I'm okay. The council members saw... Yeah. 6 years, Livy. She hadn't heard that name in a while. He'd called her that when she was 12 and trying to figure out if she was brave enough to join the army, and he was 15 and had told her, "You're already brave enough, you just don't know it yet." He'd been right, and she'd thought about that more times than she could count, in places where being right about it was the only thing that kept certain kinds of fear from becoming the wrong kind of control. 6 years, she said. But it stopped. You stopped it. A lot of people stopped it. She paused. I was the one who had the parking lot footage. You were the one who filed the complaint anyway. She let that sit. Outside, the city was making its night sounds. Somewhere a few streets over, she could hear what might have been a crowd. The city council session, maybe, or people gathering near the municipal building. Blackridge being what mid-sized cities were when something happened inside them that made them suddenly visible to the rest of the country. "I'm going back to full shifts next week," she said. "Ruth and I talked today." "Good." Marcus's voice settled. "That's good." "I need to work," she said. "I need to just work." "I know." She talked to him for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. His job, a problem he was having with his car, a show he'd started watching, and felt herself come down from the altitude of the day into something more like ordinary life, which was where she'd always been trying to get back to. The weeks that followed were the long middle of a process that didn't have a single dramatic endpoint. Vaughn's departmental termination came through first. Administrative proceedings moved faster than criminal ones, and the evidence in his case was clean enough that the process didn't require extended deliberation. He was terminated with loss of pension rights, which was a determination made based on the misconduct findings. His criminal trial was scheduled for 8 months out. He didn't speak publicly after the termination. His attorney issued a statement that no one paid much attention to. Polero resigned before her termination proceedings concluded, which the department's HR structure meant she retained some technical benefits that Vaughn had lost. Cole noted this in a press statement with the specific dry precision of someone who understood that not every injustice was fixable, but that the ones that were documentable should be documented. There were reform recommendations in the IG report specifically addressing that structural gap. Wells entered a guilty plea 6 weeks after the initial charges. 3 counts, no trial. He was sentenced to 22 months and permanent disqualification from public office. His cooperation had been meaningful enough that his sentence reflected it, which Olivia found complicated and ultimately accepted because the alternative, no cooperation, longer proceedings, the same outcome delayed by years, was worse for the 21 complainants whose cases needed reopening. Aldis went to trial. He'd been right that there were evidentiary gaps. He'd been wrong that they were significant enough to matter. The trial lasted 11 days. The jury deliberated for 2. He was convicted on all primary counts: conspiracy to deprive civil rights, abuse of official authority, and 3 counts of evidence suppression, and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. He would never hold public office again. His attorney immediately announced an appeal. Cross told her the appeal had a low probability of success given the document record. She didn't go to the sentencing. Cole offered to take her. She said no, she'd rather work. She was on a floor shift at Hargrove when the verdict came in, and she found out from Priya, who appeared at the nurse's station, with her phone held out at an angle that meant important information. Olivia looked at the screen, read the conviction counts, handed the phone back. "Okay," she said. Priya waited. "That's it? Okay?" "That's it." She picked up the next chart. "Thank you for telling me." Priya looked at her for a second with the particular expression of someone trying to determine whether an emotional response was being suppressed or had genuinely resolved into something quieter. Then she went back to the lab. The community forum was Ruth's idea. Not a press event, not a legal proceeding, a public forum, open to the city, held in the high school gymnasium on Walcott Street because it was the largest public space available that didn't carry the institutional weight of the municipal building or the courthouse. 400 chairs. Everyone filled. People standing along the walls. Olivia hadn't wanted to do it. She'd told Ruth that 3 times over 2 weeks, and Ruth had, with the particular patience of a woman who'd been managing difficult people in high-stakes environments for 16 years, waited her out. "You don't have to perform anything," Ruth said. "You don't have to be what people expect you to be. You just have to show up and tell the truth." "I've been telling the truth for 4 months. To lawyers and investigators and journalists." Ruth looked at her steadily. "These are the people who live in this city. Some of them are the 21. Some of them are people who knew something was wrong and didn't know what to do about it. Some of them are people who had nothing to do with any of it and are trying to understand what happened in their own community." She paused. "They deserve to hear from you directly." Olivia went. She was the 3rd speaker. Before her, a woman named Diane Marsh, who had been number 7 on the original 14 name list, who had filed a complaint 3 years ago about an incident during a traffic stop, and whose file had been closed without review within 2 weeks, who stood at the microphone and talked about what it had felt like to be made to feel like she'd imagined it. Her voice broke once, and she kept going. The room listened with the quality of 400 people trying not to make any sound that would interrupt something that mattered. After Diane, a man named Paul Ostrowski, not one of the 21, just a resident, a retired teacher, 60 years old, stood up and said that he'd lived in Blackridge for 32 years and had trusted the department for 32 years, and that he wanted people who still worked in that building to understand what that trust had been worth and what it felt like to learn how it had been spent. He didn't get through it without his voice going rough. Nobody in the room seemed to think less of him for it. Then Olivia walked to the microphone. She hadn't written anything down this time. She'd learned over the past months that the written version was always a little less true than the spoken one, that something happened between the page and the moment that flattened the human edges out of it. "I was treated like I didn't matter," she said. The room was very quiet. "I was standing in a parking lot in my scrubs after 12 hours of work, with my badge visible, and a man decided I didn't matter." She paused. "That feeling of being looked at and not seen, that's not mine alone. I know that now. I knew it before, honestly. I just didn't know the scale." She looked out at the room, at Diane Marsh in the second row, at Foss near the back, sitting next to a woman who was probably his daughter, his monitoring device visible on his wrist, at people she didn't recognize, ordinary faces, ordinary Blackridge, the city doing what cities did when something finally cracked open in them. "I didn't file the complaint because I thought it would lead here. I didn't have a strategy. I was angry and I was tired, and I thought, if I don't do this, nobody will do it for me." She paused. That turned out to be true in ways I didn't expect. A sound moved through the room, not a response exactly, more like a collective release of held breath. The 21 people on the list, most of them did exactly what they were supposed to do. They documented, they filed, they trusted a process, and that process was being used against them. She let that sit. That's not a failure of the people who filed. That's a failure of the people who were supposed to be accountable for the process. Those are different things. The first kind of failure can be fixed by working harder or being smarter. The second kind can only be fixed by refusing to let it stand. She looked at the microphone for a second, at the gym floor, at the ordinary institutional linoleum of a high school gymnasium where something that wasn't ordinary was happening. Nobody should have to be perfect to deserve protection. Nobody should have to have a parking lot video or a sympathetic witness or a dramatic moment to get someone to take their complaint seriously. She looked up. "I got lucky. I know that. I don't want the next person to have to be lucky. That's what the reforms are for. That's why the oversight structure is changing. That's why this is being documented and recorded and made part of the official record." She paused. "So the next person who walks into that precinct, or any precinct, with evidence of what happened to them, has a system that's actually designed to hear it." The room was still. "I'm going back to nursing," she said. "That's what I do. That's what I'm good at." A brief pause. "It turns out it's useful to be good at something when things go sideways. Whatever you're good at, hold on to it. Not because it makes you safe, but because it makes you capable. And capable people are harder to dismiss than they look." She stepped back from the microphone. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the room and moved outward. 3 things happened in the month after the forum that she thought about later as the end of the acute phase of a thing that didn't really have a clean ending. The city council, in a formal session, issued the public acknowledgement that the settlement had required, read into the record by the council chair, who managed to convey through her delivery that she understood the weight of what she was reading, even if her presence at a council meeting that had occurred while the misconduct was active was its own complicated fact. The acknowledgement named the systemic failure directly. It named the 21. It committed to independent external oversight for 3 years and a structural reform of the complaint intake process that had teeth rather than intentions. Olivia wasn't there. The statement was read into the record whether she was present or not. That was the point. The second thing was that Garrett Foss, after 11 weeks of deliberation that his daughter described to Priya as the most irritating decision-making process she'd ever witnessed, retired from the Blackridge PD. He submitted a formal letter of resignation that also served as a statement of support for the investigation and the reform recommendations. He gave one final interview, shorter than the earlier one, in which he said that he hoped the department that emerged from all of this would be one that officers could actually be proud of, and that pride and loyalty were not the same thing, and that he'd spent too long confusing them. He sent Olivia a text the day the retirement was official. 4 words. I think we're square. She texted back, not square, even. He sent a thumbs up. That was the end of that conversation, which felt right. The third thing was the envelope that arrived at Cole's office, addressed to Olivia, no return address. Inside was a single index card. On it, in handwriting that was precise and economical, I've been building the archive for 4 years. I couldn't use it alone. You gave me the opening. I hope it was worth it. No name. She looked at the card for a long time. Then she put it in the folder she still kept, organized, tabbed, documenting the shape of everything that had happened. Not because she thought she'd need it again, because some things deserved to be kept. Cole, when she told him about the card, said, "Do you want to know who sent it?" "I have an idea," she said. "So do I." He looked at her. "Does it matter?" She thought about it. About a person who had spent 4 years building an archive they couldn't use alone, waiting for the right moment, watching people get hurt and trying to prepare the mechanism that would eventually make it stop. Not a perfect person, not a heroic one, necessarily. Someone who had done the right thing in the only way they'd been able to figure out how, which was sometimes the only category of right thing available. "No," she said. "It doesn't matter." She was back on full shifts by the time the leaves came off the trees. The floor was busy the way it always was, running at the pace of genuine urgency that didn't pause for anything, least of all for the particular history of the person restocking supplies at Bay 4 or checking a chart at the nurse's station. Most of her patients didn't know who she was, which was exactly how she wanted it. A few recognized her, said her name with a particular emphasis, or thanked her for something that wasn't the medical care she was providing. And she received those moments graciously and then moved on, because there was always the next thing, and the next person, and the work didn't pause. Ruth had begun conversations about a training program, civil rights awareness for healthcare workers, understanding patient rights in institutional contexts, recognizing when a patient's situation had legal dimensions that the medical team should be aware of, knowing how to document and when to report. Olivia had agreed to help develop the curriculum on the condition that it was practical rather than theoretical. No lectures about principles. Actual scenarios, actual procedures, actual consequences. "That's the only kind that works," Olivia said. "I know," Ruth said. "That's why I asked you." It was not a grand ending. It was Tuesday, and she had 6 patients, and her knee was acting up in a specific way that suggested the weather was changing, and she'd missed lunch, and the break room coffee was worse than usual, which shouldn't have been possible. She moved through the shift the way she always moved. Not perfectly, never perfectly, making the small constant adjustments that the job required, catching the things other people missed, occasionally missing things herself, and catching them one beat later. At the end of the shift, she sat in the break room for 8 minutes before she was ready to go. A young nurse, first year, the kind of uncertain that came from competence not yet confirmed by experience, sat across from her and asked carefully how she knew when she was making the right call in a high-pressure situation. Olivia thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually doing it. "You don't always know," she said. "You make the best call you can with what you have. Then you adjust." She looked at the young nurse. "The mistake most people make is waiting until they're certain. By the time you're certain, you've usually missed the window." The nurse nodded, absorbing it. "And document everything," Olivia said. "Not because you expect to need it, because the act of documenting makes you think clearly about what you're actually doing and why." She stood up. "That's it. That's all of it." She picked up her bag and went out through the break room door and down the corridor toward the exit, through the ordinary controlled bustle of a hospital floor at shift change, past the nurse's station where Priya waved without looking up, through the automatic doors and into the evening air. It was cold. The parking lot was lit the way hospital parking lots always were. Her car was where she'd left it. She stood for a moment before she got in, not because anything dramatic was happening, because she wanted to. Because she'd spent the last several months moving from one necessary thing to the next, and she'd done what needed to be done. And now she was standing in a parking lot at the end of a Tuesday, and the air smelled like the season turning, and she was still here, And that was worth one moment of acknowledgement before she went home. She thought about the woman who had stood in this lot, a different lot, a few blocks away, a different Tuesday, and had put her hands out and waited and stayed calm because losing your calm was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. She thought about what that woman had not known yet about what was coming, about the plastic chair and the cuff marks and the folder built at 6 a.m. and the card with 6 words and a man whose chest had gone gray and come back and 47 names that had been waiting in an archive for someone to give them a door to walk through. She thought, you did not know what you were walking into, and you walked into it anyway, and it turned out that was exactly enough. Not more than enough. Not a triumphant story about a woman who was more than ordinary. Just enough. The particular kind of enough that came from doing what you were capable of and not stopping when it got expensive. The night was quiet. Somewhere in Black Ridge, the city was changing, slowly, imperfectly, with all the friction that real change required, which was not the clean version, never the clean version, but the actual one. 21 cases were being reviewed. A new oversight structure was being built by people who understood that structures had to be maintained or they became something else. The police chief who'd resigned had been replaced by someone who had inherited a department under federal monitoring and knew it, and had said publicly that the monitoring was appropriate, which was either honesty or strategy, and either way was better than what had preceded it. It wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished in a way that felt like a door closing. That was the thing about justice. It wasn't a destination. It was a direction you kept choosing to move in, and some days the movement was visible, and some days it wasn't, and the choice to keep moving was the thing that mattered. She got in her car. She drove home through the city, through its ordinary evening traffic and its lit windows and its particular small city rhythm, and she thought about the curriculum she was going to help build, about the first-year nurse who didn't yet know her own competence, about Marcus who'd answered every call on the first ring, about an archive assembled over 4 years by someone who'd waited for the right moment and found it. She thought about this, that the world was full of people who looked at someone and decided on insufficient evidence that they didn't matter, and that the only answer to that, the only one that held up over time, was to matter anyway. Loudly, if you had to. Quietly, if that was what the situation required. Persistently, above all. In parking lots and break rooms and courtrooms and city council chambers and gymnasium floors with 400 people listening. You mattered. You documented it. You filed the complaint. And you kept going back to work.